Let me kick this off with saying this one thing about the horror genre in general, is that I think in American horror, typically what the horror represents is an aspect of culture that is causing anxiety under the surface level of things.
Yeah, sure.
And those are your ghosts and your goblins.
I might even extrapolate that out to not just culture, but human nature in general. Different aspects of
absolutely.
human nature.
Yes, yeah. But like the reason why I'll say culture because particularly in American horror, it's sexuality.
Sure, yeah.
But like, so did you see It Follows?
Yes.
There's sexuality, right? The second you begin to engage in sexuality, you're what's the word when you know you're going to die? Mortality. Yeah. So the second you engage, second you start to come out of childhood, that's indicated by engagement in sexual play.
Sure.
But at the same time, the understanding that time begins to kick in. And so they tied that in that film.
Sure.
And then, of course, there's all the Friday the 13th thing.
Right.
Where, like, they're engaged in sexual play, and then there's this monster lurking. And so I find it interesting that Hereditary deals with sexuality, but it's dealing with sexuality in not sexualness, but literal sexuality, the sex of the person. And I feel that the movie, we haven't talked at all about it, so I don't know anything about what your take is.
Yeah.
But that there's a hysteria in our culture right now regarding sexuality and gender.
Sure.
And it's showing itself in this movie. And I don't want to give that all away yet, but I saw this movie twice. You've only seen it once.
No, I've seen it twice.
Did you get a lot from it the first time you saw it?
Yeah, I did, but I got a lot more out of it the second time because that whole layer of fear and anticipating what's going to happen next and that kind of horror element
goes away.
So I don't have to be processing what's the boogeyman in the shadow that's going to jump out in the camera and scare the shit out of me.
Yeah.
I was looking much more at the narrative the second time around than it was the first time. I think that's actually an interesting point about horror, is because there's this primary thing that you're dealing with, which is that it's a scary movie. They can actually slip in a lot of interesting stuff in the narrative that you don't catch as immediately as you would, because there's this other thing that's more in the foreground, which is just that element of terror.
Right. One of the things I've always felt is that we live within the universe of our mother. Meaning that your mother, basically, when you're young, you're inside her realm. So the father has certain things that he's doing, obviously.
Sure, yeah.
But the content within which you are, the fishbowl within which you swim, is your mother's perception, her literal perception of reality, becomes the coloring of the trees that you see. And, it becomes the flavor of the food that you taste, And this movie, I think, right from the beginning, the mother is meta viewing her reality and constantly creating this reality in these models that she's making. As reality is going, she's feeding this reality. So it's like she's the creative force of the reality and the recording of the reality, all happening at the same time. And in the opening scene of the movie, we actually see a house, a model of a house, and we go into a room, and then the model room becomes
the actual room,
the space within which we are in for the remainder of the movie until the end. We come out, and that is her, the feminine construction. And
whose room is it that we go into?
His. Wow, that's pretty deep.
Yeah.
So the sun is the centerpiece.
Right. At the start. At the beginning. Yeah, and at the end, obviously, too.
Yeah.
Right. So the second viewing, like I was just saying, because that whole element of anticipation about what's going to happen, I was able to just really start paying attention to the details in the movie more the second viewing, and really look at the narrative, because I was really looking much more at like, okay, what's this movie saying?
Just like the mother creating and recording reality at the same time.
Yeah.
This plot is something where events are already in play.
Yeah.
That are going to ultimately lead up to the thing happening.
Right.
And I mean, even on the telephone pole where the daughter hits her head was the Paimon symbol.
Was there?
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes.
That I missed.
So like when they're riding to the party, they pass this telephone pole and the camera quickly goes up on it and the symbol is there.
Is it?
Well, in your first viewing, you're not even aware yet that you're supposed to be aware of the symbol.
Sure, yeah.
But it's there.
Right.
So it's already, this is the pole by which she will, hit her head. Yeah, so I'm interested in what your take on what you think the message of the film is.
Okay. The broad stroke meta view that I have as far as the message of the film, I think it's a huge allegory and a warning about feminine shadow. The whole movie, I think, is consistently about unacknowledged feminine shadow.
The negative side.
The negative aspect of the feminine nature in a human being.
Okay.
I mean, I can rattle off reasons why.
When you say you could rattle off why, you're going to say because of specific things that happened in the film?
Sure, but also...
what do you think the negative aspects are typically...
feminine shadow.
Right. Speaking are of femininity. What is it?
Well, I think it would be more useful to say what about feminine shadow over femininity in general.
Right.
Because the nature of any being used in a conscious, constructive way can be incredibly healthy and positive. And the nature of that same being used in an unhealthy way, in an imbalanced way, can become very destructive. And I think that to me is a huge part of the whole message of the film, actually, is that which we're not aware of, that which we're not processing, but which is having impact and having force upon us.
Right. So part of our tasks as fully functioning human beings is to bring consciousness to the shadow.
Right.
And bring it into reality.
Right.
And instead of creating defense and structures and walls and fighting.
Sure.
Because when you do that, the shadow runs, when you deny it, it takes over.
Absolutely.
And creates this horrible reality within which you live.
Sure, yeah. The unseen, I mean, that's Jungian Psychology 101. The shadow runs you until you bring it into the light of giving it attention, giving it its right place.
You come to terms with your shadow.
Yeah.
You allow it to rest and to sit as part of your psyche and who you are. And now you have space for all of you to exist.
And generally, I mean, if you want to look at this from like a Chinese Taoist perspective, you have like a yin yang kind of thing, right? Yeah. So the feminine would be yin, the masculine is yang, right? The feminine, so yin is black with the white dot in it. So it's dark, it's nighttime, it's cold, it's shadow, it's secrets, it's what's hidden, it's what's unmanifest, it's what's yet to give birth to things. Right? It's unstructured, it's potential,
chaos,
it's fertility, it's possibility, it's all of that, right? And then yang would be order, structure, logos, articulation, light, vision, direction, focus. So here are some aspects that I think are yin or feminine or shadow in the movie. The repeated themes. These are the things I see going on over and over, and not just through the women, also in the men in this movie. There are actually two male characters in the movie that are exceptions to this, and I think that's all intentional too. But basically, we have like a major theme is possession. So being possessed by a force that's moving you from the inside that you can't control, right? I think that's a metaphor for what Jung would call animus possession. In other words, the female being possessed by her inner masculine, her inner male that isn't expressed outward. But I think that's also possession itself is a feminine form of spiritual imbalance, if you will.
The act of being possessed?
Being carried away by our own emotions would be another example
Okay, and that would be associated with femininity in some sense.
Right.
More inclined.
If the feminine is driven by intuition and emotionality and the feeling sense.
And not to say that that's negative. That has positive sides
that's
too.
Beautiful too.
Yeah,
but if that's just kind of, and that's in both men and women.
Yeah.
I'm not saying feminine as in women. I'm saying feminine as in this elemental aspect of nature that is at the felt sense level. Right. Primal, intuitive, immediate. It's about feelings, right? And then the masculine being about logic, about the mind, about rationality, about concept. And so possession in a sense is about being moved by these things you're feeling inside of you that you can't control, which is a feminine form of this terror, if you will.
By the way, I actually think that this is what this film is dealing with in terms of these roles being confused right now.
Yes.
Or we're trying to figure these roles out.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I think that's what we're ultimately going towards at the end.
I think ultimately what we have is we have a matriarch in the grandmother who is obviously a very strong, powerful person who is obsessed with a masculine ideal. And so the grandmother's outsourced her masculine to a deity, right? So I think that's part of the punchline here. So that's some seriously out of whack feminine energy there going on, right? Where she's got to call in a demon in order to be satiated and satisfied in this life. One of the major masculine energies in the movie is this demon.
Because the grandmother most likely can't tolerate true masculinity coming from a man because her son and her husband both killed themselves.
Right.
So somehow the masculine form, as it sits in the masculine, is something. Do you think that it's something that she's envious of?
I don't think we get to see that, but my sense is that she's Animus possessed. She's actually so masculine herself. She's the alpha in her coven or cult or whatever this is. She's obviously one of these top people in this cult. She's got authority. She's got power. It's clear that she was respected and feared by her daughter.
Right, yes.
She has this kind of masculine way. So I think she's Animus possessed. She's possessed by her own internal masculine energy.
Right. So in that way, her daughter has these two kids. One's a boy, one's a girl. And essentially, this grandmother has nothing that she could use this boy for. I mean, her granddaughter contains the soul of Paimon.
Right.
Who's a man.
Right.
For whatever reason.
Or who's male. And who also he's actually a demon. He's not a man. He's a male demon.
Right.
And he prefers a male body. So that's a detail when she's looking at the book and it's highlighted. The last line it says he prefers a male body.
Right.
So here's what I think happened is because Annie, the mom, banished the grandma from being in her life at all when she had her son. So she had the son. Probably the grandma would have tried to have channeled Paimon into the son. But she wasn't in his life to be able to do that. So she waited, and then when she got the chance to come back into their lives, it was for the birth of Charlie, the daughter. So the only way she could bring Paimon into the family, because she tried with her own son, but he went crazy and said that she was trying to put a spirit into him and killed himself.
Right.
She tries to channel Paimon into her own son. Fails. Fails. He kills himself. He's not going to have it. Probably tried to channel him into her husband too. Fails. He kills himself.
Or maybe she just had no use for her husband. You know?
Right. We don't really know.
Yeah, right.
But there's some sort of destroying of the masculine in her life, right? Then she's controlling and secretive and domineering of Annie. So Annie's subject again to this hidden feminine force that's it's hidden, it's secret. She doesn't even know what her mom's doing.
Right.
Her whole life. So she's trying to process what is this force acting upon me.
Do you think that's why? I mean, because the opening scene of the movie,
yeah,
the camera pans and we're in an artist's studio.
Yes.
There's paintings on the wall.
Yes.
So I already know, and I know the film is a horror film.
Yeah.
So I'm like this sort of motif of this artist being unable to stop themselves from creating, from expressing
Right.
this confusion that they don't even know how to articulate verbally,
Sure.
but can show it through image,
Right.
through painting, through a song, through making a film, but not necessarily the best in communicating with loved ones or whatever. This kind of
Right.
artist motif.
Sure.
But like you could just totally and absolutely put it onto a canvas or onto a model.
Right.
And so she really doesn't know what's happening, but she's constantly expressing it through.
Right. That's
through
how I
this-
see her. So you saw her as creator and meta viewer at the same time. I saw her as broken subject to this feminine force that she was unaware of, that was acting upon her in the form of her mother. That she was also enacting without knowing, because it's a wave that's moving through her that she doesn't even know she's participating in, but she's participating in it. Because at one point in the movie, she makes a model of the scene of the accident where Trey lost her head.
Yeah.
Which is so fucked up, right?
Yeah.
Like, talk about tragic and horrific. And her husband comes in and sees it and is like, what the fuck's this, right? And she says, what? I'm just trying to get an objective view of what happened.
I'm creating an objective view here.
Right. Is being consumed in experience and not being able to be objective and detached and look from a meta point of view.
So you think that she is consumed by it?
She's consumed by these emotions she's been feeling a whole life from her mother and the spell that's been cast on her and her family. And she's trying to process it out through her art by picturing it out externally and see what's going on in my life.
Right, but she can't. Right, but the son is trapped in that.
Sure.
Because imagine her mother's creating the reality that's causing her to be this way.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And now, inadvertently, this way that she is has the son trapped in the middle of it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's why I think
right.
That he's there. That's why I think we're in his room, inside the model.
Well, he's also the final destination of payment.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing that you said this, because the way I pictured it was that the spirit, first of all, whether or not you even believe, you have to even take for granted there's such a thing as a spirit.
Sure.
And we're not just mathematics and science,
Right.
And I mean, I think we typically can't help but feel as if we are.
Sure. Sure.
Buddhism would even say that's just ego, You feel like you're something like rattling around inside the brain.
Sure.
You're other than the brain.
Sure.
I'm a little bowl of light in there that's conscious of myself.
Right.
But I just thought that the younger daughter, what's her name?
Charlie.
Charlie.
Yeah.
Charlie. I
Who has a male name.
A masculine name. True. I just thought maybe that she was born with Payman.
She was.
Inside of her.
She was. I think so.
Okay.
I think she is Payman incarnated into little girl's body.
But then how does that work then with saying that the mother had tried to put Payman inside her son, the grandmother?
Because Payman prefers to be in a male body.
Right.
So she would have preferred to have...
But does she have the actual ability to direct where Payman goes?
We don't know.
So because the mother... She, without even knowing, puts a wall between her mother and the son.
Right.
The person that probably intuitively.
Right. Exactly. So that's a positive feminine.
Yes, protecting her son, even though she has all these issues with her son of not of it coming out that she didn't want to have the son.
Right.
She never wanted to have and maybe she never wants to have a son because intuitively she knows there's something going on
exactly
with masculine energy being fucked up.
So this is another part of the feminine shadow.
Yes.
So
can I just say something?
Go ahead.
There's a scene when they are coming. That's a beautiful house, by the way, that they live in.
Stunning.
And
I'm jealous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you come down the stairs, and she had built this tree house.
Yeah.
One of her earlier works of art.
Yeah.
Were 3 houses. There's a tree, like life.
Yeah.
And built into this tree are 3 different houses. The first one is a castle on the bottom, and it's old and decrepit. And then the midsection is sort of like a grand country house.
Yeah.
So you go from this castle
Right.
to this country house, and the shutters are old, and she created this.
You're
on
talking
purpose.
about the piece of art. It's,
Yes.
That's inside the house, kind of like near the stairway.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Gotcha.
And so the middle one is this house of like a. I think it has a front porch, but the shutters are kind of crooked, and
Sure.
it's old. It's not lived in anymore. It's
Right.
dying.
Right.
And then on top of it is this kind of modern,
Sure.
kind of smaller, just very angular and square,
Sure, minimalist kind of, yeah.
house,
Gotcha.
California kind
Gotcha,
of
yeah.
house. And so so you have like it's like this is our sort of the roots of this organization at the
Right.
bottom. It's this big,
Right.
big castle,
Right.
strong.
Right.
And then on top of it was the next phase that
Yeah.
we lived in.
Yeah.
And now we're living in this sort of postmodern
Right.
structure.
Yeah.
I found it to be interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Especially considering the three women in the movie.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Why do you think she's always chewing on candy?
I think she's a demon, and
That shows that nature. Yeah.
she's fundamentally.
Id driven, let's say, something like that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I was going to use the word corrupt, but that's not fair because she's a little girl, and I think that's part of the tension in her character is that on one level she's this innocent little girl who has no say over her nature. She just is what and how she is.
Right.
And there's something beautiful and sweet and lovable about that.
Right.
At the same time, she's kind of a twisted, fucked up little girl.
Yeah, because it's interesting. So when you would see a little girl, let's say in another eating a Hershey's bar,
Right.
who just really loves sweets,
Yeah.
it could be very cute,
Right.
and adorable,
Right.
but there's literally something sinister.
She's clearly not a normally adjusted little girl.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Do you think that we're witnessing the events through him? I didn't even think of this, but I think we're probably experiencing what's going on
Yeah.
through him. It's him that we're identified with as.
What tells you that?
I mean, we're feeling his fear,
Uh-huh.
and we're feeling he's the one
Right.
that the mother is chasing. He's the one everyone's trying to get to
Sure.
to destroy.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so we're putting ourselves in his position of trying to free himself from this imposing feminine attack.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. So it's interesting. In that same book, what it says about Payman is that he can, when they're casting the spell, he will inhabit the most vulnerable host.
And
So the prerequisite for Payman to inhabit the being is that it has to be the most vulnerable being present.
yeah.
So, in a sense, the whole movie is a whole set of works, like this whole design that this fucking cult has made around this to get Payman in this boy is to make him as vulnerable as possible.
Right. And that might be some of the things that we're seeing in our culture right now. That
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that could be a metaphor for sure for what's happening in our culture.
to the masculine.
Right.
Even just to say like men need to be more vulnerable,
Right.
men need to open up more,
Right.
men need to express their feelings more, and whether that's right or not, this movie is dealing with the hysteria around that.
Sure.
Let's say. Right.
And for what? In order to inject an anima possessed demon, male demon, basically taking this masculine ideal that these animus possessed women want to put in this broken male form.
Right. So it's like not true masculinity. It's the perfected idea
Right.
of masculinity
Right.
from the feminine perspective.
Correct. Exactly.
If the world would be perfect place,
Right.
men would be this way.
Right.
But let's say in some of the issues we're dealing with in modern society now, okay, with the changing gender norms, it's like you could have some of these lurking desires that go way back, let's say, in feminine,
Sure.
for protection,
Sure.
for a home for your children,
Right.
for enough money or enough buffalo meat
Yes.
to make sure that works.
Yeah.
So that's there built into the genome.
Right.
But yet in this sort of modern culture, that's kind of pushed back, but it's there and it's
Right.
a driving force.
It's a drive. It's a primal drive.
But then you're asking of men is to be totally the opposite of what could actually provide that. Be weak, be vulnerable,
Right.
be feminized.
Right.
And then there you have a vessel where you're literally destroying the very thing that if you were raised it the right way.
In order to put in its place what you think you want.
Yeah. What you think you want.
Right.
And I think that's what the film is dealing with.
Right. Which I mean, just a tangent here. That is the essence of like a demonic, satanic thing. Is it's a corruption of natural order. So if divine order is that if she was living a divine life, she would be bringing forth the divine masculine in the men in her family and helping them cultivate that to a high degree. She'd be helping the women in her family be there at their highest functioning capacity too, so that everyone is bringing a more powerful divine expression of themselves forward into the world.
Right.
Instead, she's done the opposite. She's corrupted it.
Yeah.
She's broken the whole structure down
Yeah.
so that she can inject what she thinks she wants.
And we could say, and we're talking about the grandmother here.
Right.
We could say she corrupted it, or if we were talking about how that plays in real life, that it's just a corruption.
Sure.
That goes far. That's kind of built far back.
Right.
That's why you have these houses
Right.
that are corrupted.
Right.
You have the bottom house
Right.
in that statue. That's the big one. They're all corrupted up into this one that's sort of just this. All that's left of the idea of house
Right.
is this sort of postmodern cubey plane constructed
which is interesting, because if that's the metaphor for the lineage, that's the sun.
The sun,
Which is payment, which
Yeah.
is masculine and ordered and square
maybe
and minimalist, rather than traditional and elegant and ornate.
Yeah, right.
feminine.
The feminine. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is interesting.
But also maybe representative of the decline of these traits in society.
Yeah.
We're losing, we're losing.
Sense of the traditional.
Yeah, ornate. You go from super ornate to a modern to
functional, square.
yeah. And in the middle there is like the ideal American home from like the 50s that you would see in some of those paintings. I can't think of some of those artists that have those paintings. There's the one with the railroad, and then behind it is this sort of Victorian house, and the distance there. I can't remember the artist.
Right.
It's interesting because I thought a little bit about this in sort of the trans community way too. Did you see that at all in the idea of sort of like?
Well, yeah, and
Like, can I just so inside this daughter is a spirit
yeah,
that's masculine,
right, sure, yeah,
and that the daughter is not the right vessel.
right,
So the daughter needs to be a man, or
Sure.
inside of a man, the soul.
sure,
And so this sort of, you can look at this as sort of like a transsexual experience in some ways.
Sure, yeah.
And again, not judging that, from my perspective, but that it's causing in American society, right now, in Western society,
Right.
a hysteria
right,
that's indicated in this movie.
sure,
That's sort of shown, it's the things it's this thing under the table right now
right,
that we're all sort of dealing with and having to learn what is. And this, you could say that this film is the example of our worst nightmare
sure.
of it,
Sure.
Right.
Well, again, going back to feminine shadow, and interesting that you use the word hysteria, because hysteria literally means, it relates to womb. So the word hysteria is connected to the word hysterectomy. It's about the womb. It's about the female reproductive system.
Yeah, interesting.
And what it used to mean to be hysterical was sexually frustrated.
Huh.
So
like
interesting that
Victorian age stuff. Yeah, that I use that word.
Yeah. Also, just quick note on the whole Satanism thing and the demonic thing, that whole transgender quality, that gender bending meeting of both sexes is very common in the iconography of kind of demons and demonology, and like Baphomet being a great example, where it's the goat god, right? Like the satanic goat usually has boobs.
Uh-huh.
So it's like part animal, part man, but with boobs.
Yeah.
So it's both male and female.
It's all that energy being mixed
twisted
up, twisted
and
in there
into its own unique expression
Yeah.
that is neither male or female.
So again, here we are in an American horror film,
Right.
and the issue under the table is sexuality.
Right.
In this way, not copulation,
Sure.
or fornication, but an actual who we are as sexual beings.
Sure.
Like, we got to get this shit fucking straight.
Sure.
Like we're fucked. We can't get this straight.
Right.
Why are we not able as a society? And we don't have to answer this here, but
Sure.
or why are we always having issues? And with sexuality, one of the reasons could be perhaps this is our closest direct link to being an animal. It's the closest thing we have.
Sure, yeah, of course.
To like being stronger than our ability to control it.
Yeah.
Sexuality, right?
Sure.
I mean, it puts you right at the edge. It's like it takes a real lot of there has to be a real strong sort of system tradition built around a way to contain that and to have that act, let's say, in a human way, and not in a spontaneous animal way.
Right.
And obviously, our culture in the last 50 years has loosened all that, and we're kind of going. We kind of are allowed to be more spontaneous in our sexuality, which has caused a whole bunch of problems.
Right.
Also, you know,
well, and
new problems.
And interesting that the movie's called Hereditary, so it's also about not just about sexuality as in gender and all that, but also in terms of what it is we're able to create from our sexuality, what it is we pass forward into the world, what do we create in a lineage, what is it that we inherit from our lineage in terms of gender, in terms of our sexuality, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And is it controlling us? Is it unconsciously controlling us?
Yeah.
Or are we aware of and in mastery of it?
Yeah, I mean, because you could say that the grandmother is this evil person who is choosing this, or that payment is in the lineage.
Sure.
Sure. And then it's hereditary. There's nothing. She's just doing what she has to do because this is.
We don't know beyond her how far back this goes.
Yeah, I mean, it could be all the way back, mother.
Sure.
But we do know that. So like trauma. So this is interesting, the nature-nurture thing.
Yeah.
Trauma and family.
Yeah.
And that's what we're basically looking at in this, is trauma being passed down from generation to generation in different ways. And each generation's handling of the trauma, right? The grandmother is in this, we don't see what her trauma was.
Sure.
I think a lot about, you go to a shrink and you say, oh, my parents did this and my parents did that, and that's why I am this way. And so when she goes to the group to speak about her trauma from her mother and what her life was, we learn a little bit about her trauma, and we say this is the result why she is.
Right.
But and so we tend to look at these things as their nurture. Mm-hmm. But man, sometimes I wonder if it's just like the reason why the family treats each other this way over the course of generations is that it's the genetics they're inheriting.
Oh, definitely.
Are predisposed towards violence.
I don't know if you're familiar with epigenetics, but that's exactly the idea of epigenetics, is that traits, not just traits, but specific thoughts and emotions and desires and fears, all that kind of stuff, can get passed down through the genetics.
Yeah.
So we literally embody all the fears, the longings, the desires, the unhealed shit, the unresolved shit, the positive and the negative of not only our parents, but our grandparents and our great-grandparents.
Right.
Like we're so much of the force of our character that we think is ours, positive and negative, our issues. Because we're talking about trauma, I'm talking about issues in this case. Mm-hmm. So many of the issues we carry aren't ours. They're unresolved stuff from our grandparents. That are
triggering themselves through our genetics.
That are in us as genetic memory.
Yeah.
And then we take personal and think is ours.
Right.
And act out we're trying to sift through, and why do I have this hang up, or why do I have this desire, or why do I have this wound?
Yeah.
Why is it I long for this particular thing that's causing havoc in my life?
Right.
And so much of that, if you learn the stories of your parents and your grandparents, your great-grandparents, you find out where the fuck it came from.
So, but I mean, I could be inclined towards violence.
Sure.
So I'm raised by a father, let's say, and the father hits me.
Sure.
And then I have children and I hit them.
Right.
And you say you learned that trait. Or maybe it's just that my genetics carry a trait that's inclined towards violence.
I would say it's both.
They feed each other, right?
Sure.
But I'm interested in the genetic component of it, right? So like that, even in a perfect situation.
Yeah.
But you never even get to see that, because if it's being driven by genetics, that trait is manifesting in reality.
Right.
Then creating reality.
Yep.
You're choosing, and spouses are choosing you.
Sure.
And because whatever you are, that trait is attractive to them.
Right.
Even if it's dormant. Like, like women don't usually choose overtly a man who's abusive.
Right.
But it's there.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, that same guy that's abusive might also be assertive in other areas of life where that's a positive thing.
Or she thinks it's a positive thing.
Right. He might be a go-getter, or he might be someone who doesn't take shit from other guys when they're out and about and she feels safe around him, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There are other positive expressions of that same trait.
Or she was abused, let's say, by her father, and so the whole host of characteristics are there.
Exactly.
The way he cuts his broccoli,
right?
Is the way a man who's inclined towards being violent cuts broccoli.
Sure.
And then that subtle cue she picks up on and goes, "This is familiar."
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's definitely the case, and I think in a lot of ways we'd be wise. We'd be better off to see our issues mostly as stuff that got handed to us that we're trying to solve and sort through that isn't even ours, and not take our own issues personally, because probably so many of the issues we carry actually didn't start with us.
Yeah, they just feel so personal.
They feel personal because they're happening in you, but
they're happening in real time.
But they started before you, and
not only that, I mean, then you act on them.
Sure.
And your life generates for you a whole sort of problems and reality that you have to respond to.
Sure. Right, which is exactly a huge part of what this movie's about, is that down from the grandmother, everyone else in the movie is basically inside this container of stuff that's in motion and in play already when they're born.
Right, because the events are happening in place to get payment into the sun.
So this whole thing's been enacted in play. I mean, you see, when she starts looking through the picture book, the grandmother's picture book of her with her coven, you see pictures of them sitting in front of a picture of Annie and her family with candles lit. Yeah. So they're worship. They've got the whole thing figured out. So there's obviously a whole group of people in the background orchestrating this plan that's been laid out very clearly,
or sort of waiting for it as it's been written in the scripture to happen.
Right.
They're watching, and they don't even have to. They're not even doing anything. Sure. It's just in motion, and they're just there.
I think they're facilitating it though too. I think it's both. They're witnessing it, but they're also participating in its arising.
Yeah, right. That's a pretty interesting thing, because they know at the end when the sun's up in the attic. And by the way, when the son is chased up into the attic by the mother, and the door closes, and you hear the knocking.
Yeah.
And then you look, and it's her banging her head.
Yeah.
That's fucking creepy, dude.
It's super fucked up. Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah. And he's calling her mommy.
Right.
Mommy.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's how you feel. That's your mommy.
Yeah.
Like losing her shit.
Yeah.
Totally.
Again, possession.
Possessed. Yeah.
Possession.
Yeah. I would imagine it hits you in some way, because we've, as children, seen times when we've seen our mothers lose their shit,
and it's terrifying.
Yeah, it's not the same person there. Yeah,
it's again being possessed by this animal nature that we have no control over.
Yeah, because I mean, she's not trying to open the door at that point. She's just
she's trying to break through the door.
She's just
with her face. Yeah,
it was interesting, because in the classroom too.
Right, so he gets possessed too.
Yes, that happened, but I was wanting to go back a little bit further. In one of the opening scenes when he's in the classroom, they're talking about a Greek myth of that has to do with fate.
Right, Heracles,
yes.
which is Hercules, which is one of the other themes in the movie I want to talk about. But what were we going to say?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, even though he believes that he is active participant in his life,
right.
as it moves towards where we all know it needs to move towards.
Sure.
And it seems like you're making free choices and free will.
Sure.
That life winds up ending at where we all knew it was going to go. And so in this myth of this boy, the son,
sure,
and he runs up into the attic, and then the mother, like with the cord from the piano,
right.
is chopping her head off.
Yeah.
And he looks over, and in this way, this is the way this cult is participating in. But they literally never touch him.
Right.
He jumps out the window on his own.
Exactly.
It's his fate to do so, and they know it's his fate to do so.
Sure.
But they have to be there for him to see, to be scared enough to do it.
Right.
So they're participating in fate.
Right. But in the background.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that too.
Well, I know you have a lot you want to go over with that, but I want to talk about the husband, because I actually thought he was a decent husband and a decent father.
Well, it's interesting because he is, I think, at the surface, one of the two masculine forces in the film. I think all the other characters besides Payman and him are feminine, feminized or feminine. They're operating in this emotional unconscious
But we don't even know who Payman is. It's just an idea.
Right. Corrupt masculine ideal, but a masculine ideal.
Right. But I sort of see the way that the father acts is masculine and in a positive way. He's not trying to control it. He's allowing these things to be.
Sure.
And he's protecting his children, his son.
Yeah.
Without being abusive. He's being firm and also allowing the mother to process what she needs to process. Or allowing for. Let's just say that instead of allowing.
Well,
allowing for the mother to have her own.
I think he's stoic. He's the one grounded, logical character. Everyone else is emotional and not very rational, not very logical. He's the one logical.
He's the
rational.
point of. He's right. the line going through
he's
the
masculine
middle of the film.
logos.
Yeah.
But he is emotionally dead, and he's very detached. So it's like he's not inhabiting his masculine sense of creating boundaries and like asserting himself soon enough. He's giving her too much space, and he's just kind of tuned out.
All right, but I mean, obviously, you can't force people.
No, of course.
So he's part of the problem in this way, right?
Correct.
Who he is.
He's a willing participant in this dynamic too.
Right, and there's a couple of scenes of them in bed together, and there's really no sex life going on there either.
Right, exactly.
So they're not romantic in that way.
And he's kind of like, you can tell he's sad, he's grieving. He's also trying to keep together the family, which is great and admirable and honorable. He's not leading the family. He's allowing everything to happen, and he's kind of just facilitating and keeping it together. More or less, he's the glue more than anything else. You know what I mean? Because she's trying to tear her own family apart without knowing that that's what's happening.
I don't like to use the word allow, though. You know,
sure.
There's got to be another word in his masculine response.
Yeah,
is to allow for a football field worth of space.
Sure.
For things to be moving and being created. And in that space would be the space where the feminine would fill.
Right.
A loving feminine, a positive feminine would come in there and create all this life.
Sure. Yes.
In this home.
Yeah.
And the home is always dark.
Yeah.
And the home is just dreary inside. Beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's always dark. And this is where love would be. This is where all the... And it doesn't necessarily have to be man, woman... But it's masculine, feminine. Sure. And this is where the feminine, all the traits we associate with feminine would fill in the house. And so it's almost like he's constantly waiting for that to happen. And it just never happens. He's sort of expecting his wife at some point to start to be loving to the son. Finish her art project.
Sure.
I don't know how a man in that situation should act.
Right. Well, I mean,
That's why I don't like the word allow.
Sure. I get it. Allow in the sense that it's his family too.
Right.
Not in control of her.
Right.
But that he's allowing all of this to impact him and impact his kids. And this joint venture they call a family, this co-created thing, he's very passive about all the events that happen.
He is numb to it in some ways.
Yeah.
I feel like he's strong.
Sure.
In some ways.
Exactly.
But in the core of it, he's sort of numb.
Right.
He's almost like he's waiting for something good to happen.
Right. That's
not happening.
Right.
And he doesn't really. It's almost as he feels that if he just keeps letting the feminine nature run its course,
sure,
it will eventually turn
Calm
into this
down.
beautiful garden, this beautiful flower.
Yeah, eventually things will relax and come back to normal. But
well, I don't think they ever were normal. Obviously, there's always been these problems he had to live with. He had to forbid his wife from the mother living there. It was him.
Sure. I mean, it is a good question. What would be a good masculine response to the situation? And you got to think, if you had been married to an artist for presumably at least the 20 years, he would be used to her doing unboundaried things, not always being great about being contained as a person, because she's an artist. She's an expressive, flowing personality. You know what I mean? So by contrast, he needs to be the one that's reeled in, contained, calm, making room for her to do that.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. That they're codependent in that way.
Or just compatible, or however you want to look at that. Shaped in ways that are complementary in that way. So he's used to that.
But let's say the art that she's creating is basically symbolic of a person who in their life has to externalize the events in order to make sense of them, and they still can't.
Sure.
So he's waiting for her to finally have her come to Jesus moment, and she never does. He's waiting for her to eventually.
I wonder.
When are you going to finish this art project?
I don't know if he expects that of her. I don't know if he expects resolution out of her, but I think I'm sure at some point they had something resembling stability. It was probably dysfunctional stability, but it's stability.
I wonder. It sounds like the entire time there were issues.
Just because there were issues doesn't mean it wasn't stable. You know what I mean? She could have a fucked up relationship with her son, and they could still have a stable life. But it seems to me like he's just looking for, your mom just died, you're gonna freak out for a bit, and then things will come back to normal.
I see what you're saying. Come back to normal, whatever that is.
Whatever that was.
Whatever that was. Which obviously there was stuff going on. There was trauma. There was issues with the mom. Right. There was detachment from the son.
Right.
Annie was detached from her son.
Right. So I see him just kind of like towing the line in that sense, but also having the fault of logos, which is not taking all these cues and all the subtle, weird information seriously. She actually wants to connect to him, but he's like getting more and more irritated.
Well, by that time, he can't tell reality anymore. Whether what she's saying is just fantasy and hysteria.
But what I'm saying is, because he is filtering out any irrational, illogical information, which is most of what's happening.
Yeah.
Because he's not taking her seriously because she seems irrational. He's actually adding to the events that unfold and helping them to happen, because he's not taking action, because he's not taking any of it seriously, because he's coming from a solely rational point of view.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, because he's detached from the ability to feel, let's say, right?
Right.
You're saying, right?
Right. So he's on the other polarity of this too much feeling of not really feeling at all.
Yeah, so he's kind of symbolic of the Stoic.
Right. Right.
We see its limitations in this because if he would have a reaction, he might have been able to pull the kids out of this, or pull the son out of this a long time ago and stop this from happening.
Exactly.
Another thing is interesting is that the younger daughter is a physically incomplete unit. She's disabled, but this physical thing, this which is feminine, is an incomplete vessel, for this thing that wants to be
in a masculine.
Right. Again, I wonder if that's the experience of feeling transsexual. That I'm in a broken, incomplete vessel.
Sure.
In our society right now, we seem to be dealing more with this feminine emergence.
Right.
That's happening.
Right.
There's all this fight against patriarchy
right.
and matriarchy. That's
right.
why this is not a movie about a feminine spirit. It's
sure.
about a masculine spirit being displaced inside of the feminine.
Yeah.
And so the feminine form itself is not good enough to carry this payment vehicle. It's a broken vessel.
Right. Well, or a mismatch, we could say.
We could say it's a mismatch, but the vessel's broken.
Sure.
That's not a mistake.
Sure.
And so I wonder why. If I think about it from like a trans perspective, again, I think like, is that the experience of feeling sort of that you're in the wrong or a broken vessel? Even maybe aggressive women like the grandmother who have all this masculine energy in them feel somehow broken.
I agree. I think that's all part of what's going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we should kind of wrap it up.
Sure.
But as you go and as the sun jumps out of the window, we see this little sort of the spirit of payment fall down and fall into him. And then his eyes open, and he's walking towards the treehouse. Again, there's some connection to birds. I don't know what this is. There's something about this particular deity, this demon that clucks, It clucks. It's not her clucking, because when that thing is inside, when Payman is inside of him, he clucks. So it's the thing. So you go up into the treehouse, and the three decapitated beings.
Yeah.
The mother floats up into the treehouse, decapitated.
Yeah.
They're all bowing down
Yeah.
to the statue of Payman with the sister's dead, decapitated head on top and the crown.
Right.
And he walks in, and I feel like they crown him, and the movie should have ended. But then there's that like brief minute where they go, all hail Payman, and then the lady tells him who he is.
Right.
And I think it would have been better if it was just left a little bit more opaque and open, and to let people know. I think it was too on the nose.
Sure. Yeah. It was definitely really very literal reveal at the end. For sure.
And it could have been better because if you don't do the literal reveal, I wonder if the studio wants that. If you don't do that literal reveal, film enthusiasts like it more, because then the film gets open for interpretation more.
Sure.
And when you do that, you make it on the nose, but then you give people who don't like to view film in that way an out. They say, oh, this was about this, and all the other stuff that we've talked about today. They don't, not everybody sees a film in the same level. Right. They don't use it for the same thing.
I do think for the most literal aspect of the narrative, it does tie it together, but it is a little too easy. I agree with you. It's a little too simple.
To just do it like that.
Yeah.
Now we have to go and see if I can find him clucking at the end.
I'm pretty sure it's not him.
Let's bet. We'll make a Janet's bet. All right.